Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We'll just begin in a minute or so.
Hi, Zoha.
Hello, everyone. Let's get started. Thank you for tuning in to the second episode of H2O Climate Connect, her impact, where we're going to be focusing on building climate resilience through gender equity, focusing on women and climate action. And it's going to be an all women panel. So, super excited for this one. So my name is Soha, and I am the climate action lead at Taiba, and I'm also Pakistan's Youth for Climate awardee by the UNDP this year. A little about Taiba. Taiba is one of the fastest growing social enterprises in Pakistan that's focusing on water accessibility, sanitation, hygiene, and we're doing this through tech enabled technology, leveraging the energy that youth has, leveraging an inclusive system to create an impact in bringing the stories of vulnerable communities from the ground to light, the ones that go unnoticed. So, thank you everyone for joining in. Let's dive deep into it and let's get started. So, looking at COP29, all the conversations, discussions happening, and that one picture that was showed at the opening with all the representatives from COP29. And everyone had a lot of opinions about it that why 3%, less than 3% women in that group picture? Why though? When considered that women and children are the one bearing the most disproportionate brunt of climate crisis, then why representative and why the voices of only less than 3%? And for that 3%, there could have been barriers, there could have been challenges. So it's a whole narrative that we've been talking about from decades of how women need equitable, women need recognition and representation in these climate discussions. So we have with us Hamna Fayaz, who's the founder of South Asia Young Women Network, or Women in Water. She's been advocating for women representation and has been going through this process of how we say shattering barriers to bring women to light. So we'd start with a keynote from Hamna Fayaz, would be shedding light on how the channel of women representation in climate action has evolved over the years, what sort of barriers and challenges we're seeing, and what's in the future. Are the barriers all down, or are we actually making or trying to create solutions for that, or is it all just symbolic? So Hamna, thank you so much for joining us, and the stage is now yours.
No, thank you. Thank you, Zoha. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hamna Fayaz from South Asia Young Women in Water, and it's an honor to, join you all today in this crucial conversation on redefining climate resilience through, gender equity. I'd like to begin by thanking Taiba organization and especially Zoha for organizing this powerful dialogue and for, inviting me to represent South Asia Young Women in Water. This platform itself serves as a testament to incredible work women across the globe are leading and fighting against climate change. As we have discussed, women's roles, and as we discuss it forward, the roles that women take in shaping climate resilience, it's essential to we have to recognize the systemic barriers that continue to still hinder their full participation despite being disproportionately impacted by climate change. Women remain underrepresented in decision-making processes, as we saw in COP this year or two in Azerbaijan. These barriers, they range from cultural and societal norms to institutionalized inequities and in education, in finance, and access to resources. In many parts of South Asia still, for example, women are central to managing water and agricultural systems, and yet their voices are often excluded from governance structures and that dictate how these resources are managed. This exclusion itself, it kind of perpetuates a cycle where the most vulnerable, they remain unheard in policies directly affecting their lives. However, in the face of these challenges, women, we are not just victims, we are leaders and innovators in advancing climate justice, leaders that we see on this panel today. All across South Asia and beyond, we see women leading grassroots movements, advancing community resilience and championing sustainable solutions. At South Asia Young Women in Water, we have witnessed firsthand actually the transformative power of women-led initiatives. Our network has brought together young women all across South Asia to develop localized solutions for water management, to advocate for climate adaptive policies, and to amplify the voices of communities most impacted by climate change. Because it's our countries who are the most impacted by climate change, and it's also our countries who are the least prepared for it. So, for instance, in Karachi, our dialogues have highlighted how women are spearheading efforts to improve water security in informal settlements, creating ripple effects in both public health and economic sustainability. These stories, they don't just underscore the critical need to not only include women in climate decision making, but to also recognize them as agents of change who bring unique perspectives and lived experiences to the table. Although to truly redefine climate resilience through gender equity, we do need systemic shifts. For example, elevating representation, access to climate finance, education, capacity building, etc. Women must not just be present, but have decision-making authority in climate negotiations at events like COP and policies and programs. Representation that is without impact is just insufficient in today's day and age. Bridging the gender gap in climate finance, it's also essential. Women-led projects often receive less funding, as we see, despite their proven efficiency and community focus, because women, they bring a holistic perspective to everything, a very inclusive perspective, I must say. Financial mechanism, they must prioritize equitable access and provide resources to skill women-driven initiatives. Empowering women with these skills and knowledge and resources to lead climate action is non-negotiable, at least to me, and I believe to all of the women on this panel today. It involves creating platforms for mentorship, training, and collaboration, something that we also do at South Asian Young Women in Water. The global climate movement must also, shift from a top-down approach to a bottom-up model where Black grassroots leaders, many of whom are women, as we speak, are recognized and integrated into national and international frameworks. So in conclusion, as we look forward to discussing these pivotal events and conferences like COP, let's remember that climate resilience is not achievable without gender equity. the intersection of these two forces is actually where we find sustainable and inclusive solutions. So let's ensure that women are not just invited to the table, but are shaping the agenda and leading the change. I think together we can really dismantle the barriers and amplify their impact and create a world where every woman and girl is empowered to contribute to a climate resilient future. Thank you so much, Zoha.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's very important. These are conversations that we've been repeatedly putting to table, that how we need to bring equality. We need to have women voices in the agendas that we're setting. So as you just said about, when we're talking about policy, when we're talking about bringing things to paper, it's not just about having us on the table, but also having our words written down and signed. So when it comes to that, do you think that over the years with COP and other conferences as well at the local and global level, have we actually started bringing tangible outcomes when it comes to women representation in climate action? Or has it just been just like a voice till now that we need representation, or maybe bring us representation, or this is what we want to do, this is all the planning that we have, this is the energy that we're holding, but is it actually translating into action?
I think what I see and what I have experienced on global platforms, like I have attended conferences, global platforms like Stockholm Water Week and stuff like that. What I see everywhere is, as we do, as we discuss greenwashing in marketing terms, right? So this is kind of, there's a gender washing going on at these events, as we saw at COP also. That one picture was enough to tell us what's going on inside these conferences. And what I believe is I'm sorry, what was the other part of your question? Can you please repeat it?
So I was asking that when we come about like policies and writing it down, is everything actually translating into actions over the time, or do you think that there's like a favorable pattern that we could be probably hopeful that action would come?
It's very hard to believe, when we see events like COP really misrepresenting what we should have at this point. In 2024, we should not be discussing these things. We should not be seeing this underrepresentation of women. We should not be holding the United Nations accountable for these things. We should not be, and yet we are doing it. So I think there is still a long way to go. And that one picture was just enough to tell us that how the Everest that we still need to climb in terms of these things.
Definitely. And like just building on that, you also talked about how when we're looking at the grassroots level, we're looking at a lot of factors that are intensified by this one war against climate, and especially because South Asia Women Network is working particularly in agents of like water, and then also associated sort of stereotypes, taboos that come with it. So when you come about these very foundational factors in terms of accessibility, so in terms of accessibility to the very basic human right, water, and then in terms of accessibility to menstruation resources or sanitation facilities, or maybe hand hygiene, something very basic. Do you think we're covered on the foundations to actually be talking about the big policies that we're setting in terms of resilience? Because I think when it comes to like global conferences, we're always talking about mitigation, resilience, adaptation, but have our foundations been covered? Because we still see 22 million people in Pakistan with no access to water. And then we're talking about climate finance, we're talking about carbon markets. So how are we paving the way between the two? Hamna, can you hear us? Okay, I think we lost Hamna there. Hello. Okay. I think till Hamna rejoins, Daniel, I would love to hear your perspective on how we said this. This was COP29, COP of Finance, setting up carbon markets, setting up access to financial resources, and building that resilience and adaptation around this. Do you still think that we still lack the gender sensitive access to climate finance? Because I think when we come at local level, we're taking great initiatives, but when it comes to like bigger access to financial resources or climate finance, is it gender sensitive? Do women have the light to it, and do they have the access to it? And when we're setting that agenda, when we're setting that goal, do we actually take into account the vulnerable or women on the ground level, how the systems and mechanisms are going to work for them?
Thank you for the question, Zoha, and thank you so much for the invitation and setting all of this up as well. I think that that's a great question, and I've been following COP29, and I attended COP28 last year as well. And what I've noticed is the language is there, right? So we, you appropriately said, is it gender responsive policy? And so I think we all know that this is something we should be doing. In my mind, gender isn't really separated from all of the other minority issues that we're trying to raise all the time. So Indigenous people's rights, island states, things like that. In my mind, they all kind of come together. And so when I look at policies, I'm looking at, are the underrepresented there at all? And I think we just get so lost, honestly, in numbers. So right now there's argument about $250 billion. And I think those are unfortunately the areas that we get lost, and that's where the most conflict is I feel like often we don't even get to the point of these sort of gender related or minority related discussions. But I do think it does come into play when we talk more about how donations or grants and funding is allotted. And I think that's really where we can take advantage of looking at including gender responsive policies all the time. I mentioned carbon markets. So in the voluntary carbon market, if you look at how carbon pricing is done, it's very frequent that carbon credits with co-benefit. So that means that there is an additional added benefit normally related to a sustainable development goal, in addition to whatever emission removal reduction is going on. So once you have a co-benefit, those carbon credits fetch higher prices. So one of them, SDG number 5 is gender equality. And so there are ways in which gender equality and gender responsive policies are rewarded in climate finance, but do I think it's where it needs to be? Not yet. Thanks.
Right. I think we will definitely revert back to there. Like, how do we strategize the system to actually bring awareness and education around that? I think we have Hamna back. So Hamna, I think Dan, you very well put that we're talking about great jargons like climate finance and carbon markets and getting women involved into the voices of all of that. So when it comes to, we were talking about how we could actually translate these words to tangible outcomes or actions. That is where we would love to hear your opinion. Do you think that's happening? What sort of way are we trying to pave for that? Okay. So Hamna is basically in transit right now, and I love her energy for joining the panel. So I think whenever she rejoins back, we can take till then. As Danya just mentioned, we had great insights about
hello.
Yes, Mabra, hello.
Hi. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm so confused. Was that question directed at me?
No, that was towards Hamna. We will just get
Okay. I was so confused. Okay, because I'm also in transit. So I was confused for a second. Okay, sorry, go on.
I love how climate activists, all of the women, they're currently traveling all around the world for COP and GLOBE. So on that note, so definitely we have Mahnur Asha. She's also going to be traveling back from COP today. So Mahnur, Danya really nicely put together how you were attending the COP this year as well. And there were all these conferences and discussions around climate finance. And this is the COP of finance. We're going to bring accessibility to grants, women-focused grants, all of these agendas that we're setting. So any sort of live insights that you would like to give us of how these conversations were actually happening? Do you think there's a gap between what was happening on ground and to what was being reported? What sort of conversations did you take a part in? And what insights and learnings could we potentially grasp from all of the settings that were at COP? So over to you, Mahnur, if you can hear us.
Hey, hello guys. I hope all of you are well. I'm really trying to get out of my place right now. So it's like, I'm sorry if there are any kind of background noises. But yeah, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the question as well. So, at COP29, I know you guys might have discussed this already, but um, this time around, like there were only 8 represented, like executive representatives.
Manu, I think you went to
Sorry.
mute.
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So, even though at the executive level we have seen that the women representation is not enough, but if I talk about specifically the party delegations, we have seen like a significant improvement, like around 40% of the party delegations was constituted of women alone. And I see that as a huge improvement. However, if you talk about like, if you really want to see that the product of these conferences and the negotiations really reflects the realities, we need to question that, are we really bringing to the table the women that are actually being impacted? And whenever I ask that question, I don't see those women on those tables. I don't see those women even as observers. So I'm talking about indigenous women. I'm talking about women that were directly impacted by, all these climate disasters. I'm talking about young girls. In fact, I have seen, unfortunately, at COP, because it's every year we hear that, okay, this is going to be the largest COP, and this is going to be like hosting around 70,000 people and stuff like that. So not all of these people are actually found in the right places at the right times. There's a lot of distractions that are happening at COP. There is like a whole, I'd say, a science exhibition kind of a thing that's going on, and you'll find so many people there, and nobody knows, not nobody, but most of the people don't know and even don't care about what's actually going on in the negotiations rooms. And I believe that this is like a deliberate kind of a choice that these settings make to actually distract the people from the real things. So I just share this example that I follow, mainly I follow the ACE negotiations, right? So I still remember it was like our last informal consultation, and Saudi Arabia, suddenly, all had agreed, but Saudi Arabia raised a flag, and suddenly all of the observers in that room, they started like hushing and making silent noises, and the pressure got built to such an extent that ultimately Saudi was forced, kind of forced by the G77 as well as the observers in that room, to actually give up their stance. And the text actually got adopted. So when you see examples like that, you understand that it is really, even if we are observers, it is really important for us to be in the rooms. But unfortunately, that's not how the space has been created. So I specifically talk about women, and in the gender negotiations, we were like again and again experiencing this, that these parties were not releasing the text when it was required at the right time, and they were not, in fact, even telling the timings and the place of the negotiations. So we often got the news of the negotiations after they were done. So it's like a really interesting, a kind of a saddening environment as well at times. But for me, an inclusive and a proper inclusion of women in these spaces would actually mean that they are sitting on those negotiation tables, they are at the right time at the right places, and our parties, our governments are actually making an effort to include them, not to tokenize them, not to just fill out that checkbox where they can say, okay, this is gender inclusive, but actually give them the power, listen to them, have proper consultations with them if they can't take them to COP. And these things are really really important. And on the grants, and there are so many private corporations and organizations present there, and obviously there is this dearth of finance for genders, and women led and women serving organizations. And I do believe that these spaces do offer that kind of an opportunity where you can connect with the right people. But then the question is that you're competing, even if your project is like top notch, you're always competing with so many other people. And I do not believe that it is just and fair that the people coming from the communities like ours that have already been affected so badly still need to compete to get the finance that is theirs, that they have the right to. So a lot of systematic, issues and stuff like that. But yeah, overall, these were my observations. Thank you.
Great, and I think those are things that we've been seeing from like previous COPs as well, to a lot of local conferences that happen as well. Manu, if you could just like build on, you said about how strategies are built, but we're never told about the time, we're never told about the venue, what's going to come on the paper. And when there's a lot of uncertainty around what's going to be settled, how do the strategies then at the very end claim that they're gender sensitive strategies or they're gender sensitive policies? Where's the input coming from? What's your opinion there? And if the input is coming from other sort of institutions, how are they actually measuring or maybe evaluating that what they're setting is gender sensitive or it has been inclusive? Do they have like a mechanism where they would take inputs, or maybe where they would involve somehow, if not directly on the table? Do you think there's systems in place, or are they like sufficient and enough?
I won't like exactly say that they're the best strategies, but we know that civil society and a lot of NGOs have these informal settings. For example, what you call constituencies. So there is a women gender constituency, there is a youth constituency, and other farmer constituencies, and many more that are directly affiliated with the UNFCCC. And so what we try to do in these constituencies at COPs is that we set up bilateral discussions, bilateral discussions with the party negotiators on a certain agenda item. So we call them into a separate room and we put our demands in front of them. We ask them questions that ideally should be really direct. They should be confrontational, they should be simple, and they should be not appeasing. And so that the purpose of these conversations is not only to make them answer it, but essentially to let them know what our stance is. So this is one way to put a pressure on the party that might not be in your favor and that even is in the same is favoring the conversation that you want to put into the text. So that's like one thing that we do. But the other thing, obviously, as observers, we try to moving into the meeting rooms, standing outside them, having different actions so that we can communicate our anger and everything like that. And there are also certain informal consultations that the presidency holds with these constituencies and these NGO groups as well. So these are some of the ways, and then it also depends upon the party itself, whichever party you're talking about, upon how they want to have a consultation, or if they want to have a consultation with these groups and these members of the society.
Right, right. I think, as you mentioned previously as well, it's all about the system that we need to set in place and then look at how we make that system inclusive. And those are all initiatives that are taken towards the biggest step to make it all inclusive. We have great response coming from the live chat where the people ask me if you're currently at the COP as well and if we could have a glimpse. So I think to just like share, she had previously shared with us as well. She's currently going to be coming back. So we couldn't have glimpse, but you could go definitely follow her. She has great insights from all of the sessions that she's been attending and everything that's been happening, and also as the change and voices that she's bringing to the table as the chairperson of the Youth and Children and Climate Change panel as well. So thank you so much, Manu, for taking out time. Those were all great insights. And I think just building onto that of how we're talking about systems, we're talking about strategies. We have another climate advocacy leader, Mavra Bari, with us. Coincidence how she's also traveling currently. So we'd love to hear, Mavra, on how, if you could link this to how Manu was saying, it's all about systematic things that we're looking at. It's all about strategies and policies that we need to build and make sure that they're inclusive so that women could have their complete part in climate policy, climate negotiation. And it's not just always about women in climate action, and also about the local challenges, how we could bring those to policy action, how we could bring those to negotiations. So over to you, Mavra, if you could share insights of how you also intertwine your storytelling and your element of psychosocial impact and sociologist and your work together into policy. So how you look at that umbrella as well. So over to you, Mavra.
Thank you so much, Zoha, and apologies. I think it's very loud where I am, so apologies for that. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's a great question, and I feel like I'd like to actually build on what people before me were saying, like Dania and Manur. I mean, when we talk about representation, storytelling, representation go hand in hand. And it is a bit of a chicken and egg kind of situation because, I mean, because of the systemic barriers that women face in a lot of fields, especially technical fields, um, there is a lack of, I mean, I wouldn't say a lack of, but there is a disproportionate amount of how many women there are in, say, something like climate finance or carbon markets, as Dania was saying. But that is not because women are not interested or things like that, but it's just because women have less access to education, to training, to networks, to excel. Even though we, of course, we know that is changing, rightly so. So a lot of the times, even in my work with the development sector in Pakistan, you have all these manuals because everyone will say, oh, there's no woman in this field, or we can't find women in this field. Yes, there are fewer women, but it's not because, that we are lacking any kind of wanting to be in these fields. But that's why it's really the onus is on governments and companies to upskill, to encourage women to get into these fields because, as we know, climate change disproportionately affects women and girls. Until we don't have those seats at the table, it is very difficult to make that kind of change. So that's part of it also. And I also think that the narrative building, like we keep talking about the floods 2022, which of course had such a disastrous effect on so many people, but especially women and girls. And then we did include even in the drives for women. There were because there was so much period poverty, we did try to include as much as possible the narrative that women are suffering like these kinds of horrific things, giving birth within the flood, not having access to anything during their menstruation cycles. So these things did get out there in the media. I think people were able to understand that women are suffering in a different way. But again, sometimes these are very disempowered, kind of, that whole, we call it poverty porn. It's just this one narrative that's sometimes being peddled, and not as much, the brave things the women did. So I think there's a needs to be a balance because we are, of course, a very vulnerable nation, and there is a lot of actual victimization that is happening, but there's a lot of strength and power that's coming out. But on the other hand, I also feel like, we use this word so much, resilient, Pakistan is resilient, Pakistanis are resilient. But I think at some level, like we should not be having to be resilient all the time, like we're post-colonial. I mean, I don't even say we're post-colonial. Colonial is alive and well. Colonialism is alive and well in a different form today. And I think the loss and damages funds, all of these loans, and I mean, mostly it's, there's very little concessional finance that Pakistan has access to. So, even these barriers to, like I think Dania was saying, that we don't have enough, like we are kind of vying for this fund, and it's not agile enough for developing countries. And I think 69% is actually yeah, it's not loans, like they're not grants. They have really high interest rates, which is going to spell disaster for countries like Pakistan in the future. So I think bringing more women as not just victims of the climate crisis, but empowered actors is very important. And I think, of course, like journalism is a really good tool for that. Other kinds of communication, storytelling, these kinds of things, like tying it in with advocacy and working very closely with grassroots institutions, right? And like organizations, because oftentimes we don't know the stories happening on the ground. So I think just building more linkages and working with grassroots actors is really important, especially during like platforms like COP29, right? Because a lot of the time we're thinking about the negotiations, we're thinking about our positionality in these terms, but we're not really thinking about how we're doing the storytelling because it sometimes remains really high level when we need something a little bit more I think, human-centered. So yeah, that's something I would like to add. I hope everyone could hear me. It's a bit loud.
Yes, we could hear you, and those were great words. Mom, I'm very interested to know. So you talked about how women could potentially bring human element of climate change that you're saying to the table. And when we're setting policies, we're talking about loss and damage. So that was like an entire chapter that was talked about last year. Now climate finance. Do you think policy with regards to climate change currently is a little far-fetched, especially for the global south? So when it comes to vulnerable communities like us, we're not talking about the human element. I do personally feel that the conversations, they do lack the human element. They lack the psychosocial element when it comes to, as we talked about sanitation resources. There have been cases when we're providing like facilitation or aid, pads would be regarded or dismissed as not important currently. When know that that's like the periods won't stop, but the floods would displace them out of there. There would be pregnant women, there would be young girls. All that, how do you think, and in your element, in your transition, your personal story, do you think whenever you bring that human element, it's given acknowledgement or recognition, and later also action? It's given that importance, or is it just symbolic? It's just about conversations when it comes to human elements, and when it comes to probably grants, funds, or financial resources, that is where we're only talking about development or action, maybe.
Really interesting point, Zoha. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's like, the vulnerability we even have to the climate crisis, right? It isn't in this like vacuum, right? It's coming from all of the systemic barriers and realities that women face anyways, right? Like, we know even in the West, women are less believed by doctors when they say they're in pain, they're misdiagnosed. So women's pain and suffering is invisibilized in our society, in all societies anyways. So when this is happening during a crisis, I think it's put even further on the back burner, which is not right, right? Like, we really need to keep women, keep like an intersectional lens when we're talking about disaster risk reduction policies, these kinds of things. But on another hand, I also think it's important that we understand that all of our current economic systems, these capitalistic systems, they are very much based on a very patriarchal kind of mindset, right? Like, number one, women's labor is, again, invisibilized, right? Women's unpaid care work, labor, we do, if, that's such a huge, like trillions of dollars worth of an industry. But, we kind of have made these systems off the backs of women's unpaid, unrecognized labor. And I honestly think what we need, the only thing that will save humans on this planet, and I don't say we need to save the planet because this planet has been well and alive, it will be fine without us. But it's humans that are at the risk of being extinct, and as well as so many other species. So I think like we need to rethink our systems that are broken, that are based on very exploitative, extractive methodologies, So I think until there's more of a like really like a recalibration of the entire world and our systems, because they are broken, even green growth, I think is a very kind of it's part of the puzzle of the solution, but definitely it's not. We know that there's so much there's so much iron ore, copper that's needed, critical rare minerals is another story. There's so much atrocities, there's genocide happening in the DRC because of them. And then also, how do you recycle so much? How do you waste manage solar panels, wind turbines, all these things? Like, it's not, green growth is not, silver bullet either. So I think, I'm honestly a proponent of post-growth methodologies or degrowth methodologies, because I think overconsumption, overproduction is actually what's at the heart of the climate crisis, not just an energy transition. So, and in that, indigenous communities, women, that is very at the center of it, So I really believe we have to change our system, and not just economic system, but our social, economic, that our well-being. And I think thinking about other metrics of progress other than GDP is very important. And a lot of countries are doing that. Recently someone measured the growth of a city by seeing how many girls are comfortable riding their bikes to school, and that's such an interesting metric, right, to understand how well a community is doing, rather than just looking at, okay, how many dollars are being generated, because GDP actually grows if there's a war, if there's a like the pandemic, COVID. We've seen that GDP is actually a very false narrative. So I think all of these things are very interlinked. And I think women's and like gender intersectionality, is very important in that, like, in terms of class and geography and age as well. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah. I think that's very interesting, and I would like to link it to how you said how journalism and storytelling could definitely play a role to it. So how you could maybe change the metrics of how you're putting things to stuff, so not GDP or mainly of safety, security, empowerment. So all of those factors and how you're putting the narrative together. So there's someone also very interesting comments coming up, and they actually talking about how storytelling could change the narrative, how we're telling that they're women survivors rather than women victim. We're talking about leaders, about empowerment. So I think, Mara, great insights. Thank you so much. And I think on that note, we'd shift to Mariam Khan, the founder of Climate News Pakistan. And she has been building these narratives of how we could bring recognition to different concepts. And one of her concepts that's been taking light currently is eco-anxiety, of how that's hindering personal growth or productivity, of how that's putting a lot of pressure on the youth, and especially also girls, young girls. So Mariam Khan, thank you so much for joining us. And I think you could definitely very well put together to how narratives and how storytelling, to the sort of language that we're using, to the sort of empowerment that we can convey through that, could play a very important role. So yes, over to you, Mariam.
Thanks, Soha, for having me. So absolutely. Let's just say that to answer your question in just a word, if I had to, it's affirmative. That for sure, we are building humanitarian narratives that are very much, and I think everyone before me has put it out right, they elicit pity. Now, whether that is for fundraising or the kind of, climate financing that is needed, it is wrong. It is not okay. And why it's not okay is because it is very much overshadowing women's contributions as proactive problem solvers. And this storytelling or this narrative, where is it coming from? I think Marva too very eloquently put it out there. It is a legacy of colonial representations, which is depicting women from global south as, passive victims or active victims rather than agents of change. Like, for instance, let's take whether it was our flash floods back in 2022, we had stories emphasizing displacement, which obviously happened, and loss during that entire flooding season. But at the same time, we were unable to capture the critical role in the communal rebuilding that women had, their critical role within it. And then the advocacy that was done by local women for disaster resilient infrastructure within Sindh, within Punjab. So similarly with Bangladesh, flash floods happened, and we saw their media, which I often term it as yellow journalism, portraying Bangladeshi women as victims of rising sea levels and floods. And again, I'm not saying that there's no truth to it, but at the same time, we are overlooking adaptive innovations of Bangladesh, such as the floating vegetable gardens or the disaster-prepared community networks. So if that is happening, where is it evolving from or coming from? It is coming from, the colonial hangover we have. And we need to shift the tone there. Because when we are recounting all the tales which are very much British narrated, of South Asian famines where women have been the silent sufferers, we are not talking about the, South Asian women who actually are at the heart of traditional ecological knowledge, such as crop rotation or seed preservation. We don't talk about, I think one of you was previously saying, the indigenous women who've been the testament to this kind of resilience. So there needs to be a modern retelling of these, counteractions. And then secondly, I feel like when it comes down to storytelling, we need to evolve it. We need to shift the lens if not to resilience, at least to agency, right? And we need to talk about incorporating equity in climate narratives. We've been talking about equity a lot throughout the conversation in the past 40-45 minutes, and there's a lot of focus on this buzzword, which is, usually it's co-joined with finance, and I understand, so, right, we all have some level of background in that. But I think that climate narrative equity is equally important, because so just the other day I was watching this listening or watching this podcast on cancer. I love scientific knowledge. I was just like trying to understand, and I understood that cancer is a fermentation process, which is sort of revealed through metabolic causes, and not it's not fair to say that it's entirely genetic. I think climate equity is like that, right? You have to put it in a lens where you talk about these narratives from not just a solely external reason that, oh, it's because geography, it's because disasters, etc., etc. It's deeply systematic. And so the reason I use that analogy is just to say that climate equity, the narrative that you build around it, needs to be very much firstly focused on the deeply rooted structural inequalities that are there when it comes down to women not having, access to any of these resources, women being vulnerable, women being foreshadowed as acute victims and not being proactive agents. So we need to reframe our literature. We need to reframe our media. And that's why often I talk about ecological anxiety or eco anxiety, because it all comes from actually reading and learning and doing all this advocacy and being a part of it, that you're sitting there and you're realizing, oh, it's not just this year or last year or a couple of decades, it's been going on for eons, and we don't have any kind of restructuring or reframing of history, of literature, or of media. So yeah, I feel like that there is a lot of reframing of narratives and evolving of narratives that needs to be done, and we need to shift the language or the lens from what do you call, victim mindset to more of showcasing global south as an agent of change, because that's what we're technically doing here. We are literally sitting and saying that we want to be the ones who head this change. So yeah.
Definitely, and Mayim, just like building on to that, how you've been talking about changing narratives and very well, like how we need to look at it from a multi-lens sort of view. And I think Climate News Pakistan has come up with that initiative to bring those narratives, to bring those stories to light, and particularly in the space of journalism that initially primarily is also looked at it from gender inequity, that there needs to be women, there need to be voices and action. So when you look at about A, challenges in journalism, then B, challenges of narratives and climate together. And when you come together, what sort of reception do you think personally you're getting in terms of the narratives that you're putting out? Do you think the audience that you're tapping is getting the gist of how this is a very intense issue and of how this is not just, as you said, rising sea levels or weather change? It is systematic, it is mindsets, it is a lot of social factors, it is lack of education, all of those factors. Do you think we're getting that reception? And if not, how do you think we can potentially, maybe at an individual or at a very local level, set the foundations of reshaping that system?
Oh, okay. Amazing question. I think that yes, I'd like to be fair here. To an extent, I believe that we're getting that reception, and I feel like that reception is particularly from people who are a part of a lot younger generation. So in the most generational form, if I had to put it out, I think Gen Z is the most receptive to the work that I put out there, and I love to see that. I live to see that, I'd say. And I think it's because primarily the eco anxiety is building up right there. Anything prior to that, or everyone prior to that, has sort of become somewhat desensitized to the issue itself. So I think that that's where the reception, the most of it comes from. Then moving on, how are we evolving that space is something that I think is built on collective solutions, like you just mentioned yourself and what I just said. We want to sort of help or reframe not just journalism, but create a platform where we have research, communication, writing, or all forms of communication in a way which are super tangible, but also which are highlighting stories of people from around the globe and not just centered to Pakistan. But the idea is that we're trying to build it up ground within Pakistan. So it gives out the sense that it's something that has been birthed and built in Pakistan, but it's a global outreach platform, right? So one, that if we're trying to highlight collective solutions here. Number two, we really want to integrate local voices. So for example, whether it's sustainable finance or whether it's sustainable fashion, there's no what do you call a there's no limit to the category there. So we're trying to collaborate with women all around Pakistan as well as globally to co-create narratives, instead of imposing, outsider narratives, or we want to ensure authenticity, empowering ownership of their stories. Like for instance, I just recently did this campaign with a US startup, Time for Better, during the COP time, where we are trying to integrate voices of women from around the globe, right? And then media, education, that's all a part of the frenzy, I'd say. But I think for me, the more important part that I personally focus a lot on is, I don't know if any one of you has read, um, Toni Morrison is an amazing writer. She wrote in Beloved that the trauma of slavery does not erase the characters. And I think that's the idea, the ideation that CNP wants to work at, I want to work at. I see a lot of other young people younger than me who want to work on at, that they want to build the capacity of creation, build the capacity of resistance. And I know, like I think Marva just said, it's sometimes extremely exhausting to always be the change maker or always be in the front seat and say that this is we're resilient. But I think at the end of the day, I think climate storytelling needs to embrace this duality. I think it's okay to have a climate storytelling where we say that, yes, there is what do you call, there is a problem in the whole space, that there is gender inequality, inequity here, that there is an issue with climate crisis, that yes, we are the largest recipients of it. But at the same time, we also say that we have the capacity for resistance and for creation. I think if we do that, that just makes also storytelling a little more, I think, interactive and easy to understand. And it also lowers the anxiety, by the way. So to have those, it's sort of therapeutic in a way, because then people come up to me, they have these conversations and they say, oh, we've been so done with the smog, we've been so done with whatever is happening, but we saw something that was related to history or was related to certain storytelling, or a certain literary piece. And then it reminded me that, oh, how much I love that book. And then I want to start working again on climate advocacy. So I think we're trying to make it as relatable as possible.
Definitely. And I think that element of relatability is in everyone. It's just about recognizing that we're all part of this ecosystem and we're all suffering to somewhat an equal or more level. And then that is the gap that we need to cover for our fellows as well. So I think definitely very, very interesting narratives that have been put in up, very unique ways of looking at climate crisis. So thank you so much, Mariam. And I think just like building on to that, Dania, as we were initially talking about strategies and we were talking about technical element, and since you hold expertise in climate finance and corporate sustainability and ESG, so even like in our episode 1, we were talking about how maybe currently development is very centric to the sort of infrastructure, to the sort of technical solutions that we're looking at. So maybe building funds, maybe building buildings. So and then we're missing the psychosocial element, we're missing the strategies, we're missing the stories, as Margaret just mentioned. So when it comes to your role, when you look at it, because I think technical solutions are also as important to that. So now when we're talking about carbon markets or carbon offsets, its effectiveness, is it just like a temporary solution or a buzzword that's going to be there that, oh, you've adopted it, great, you've made it to the list, but is it actually going to be sustainable? And then when it talks about climate finance or building funds, like loss and damage, it was said that it would be effective after 5 years. How are we going to be reactive to when the crisis would hit. So when it comes to those sort of technical solutions, do you think how do we look at its strategize, and how do we look at its effectiveness? And B, do you think we also need sort of communication there? Because I see this a lot around, that when we're talking about funds of billion, people would be like, they're always setting it, it's not going to be implemented. Could we actually change the narratives and storytelling around technical aspects also in a way that it communicates well that yes, it's for you, it's for a solution? So yes, with regards to the technical aspects in terms of effectiveness and strategy, and then in terms of the narratives and storytelling, we'd love to have your point of view.
Sure, thank you, Zoha. So I'm going to start with saying, I think generally there is a very large overlap between what is good for women and what is good for the environment and for climate. And I think that, you brought up corporate sustainability and all of these things, there is sort of that awareness bringing. And actually, if you look at ESG specifically and you look at which aspect, like there are lots of studies saying, is this effective? Does this actually help a business make more profit? And the one indicator that proves to be true is governance. And when you have a more equitable board, it is your business will make more profit. And that comes into so many other things that we see as well. And if we talk about women economic empowerment, what's the biggest barrier between women and economic empowerment or getting jobs? And normally, at least in Pakistan's case, it's frequently transportation, right? And so when Mariam brought up smog as well, and what is everyone advocating for right now? And it's public transportation, and safe, accessible, comfortable, women-friendly public transportation will help us in both regards, right? And so when we talk about these big funds, I think it remains to be seen, right? All of these things are fairly new, so it's going to be, I think it's going to come down to a lot of how those people who have the funds prioritize these issues. As someone earlier mentioned, the problems with COP and it currently being more of a top-down situation instead of bottom-up. And I think more emphasis on the bottom-up is what's going to get us more equity in these regards. But I think that luckily we do have a lot of examples of the sort of funds or cash transfer that has worked, right? Especially in Pakistan, BISP, the Benazir Income Support Program, has done wonders. And there's a reason it still exists 16 years later through multiple administrations, which is quite a feat in Pakistan, right? And it's because it works, and it's because women spend money differently than men spend money, and women will often spend it on their families, and men will tend to, if they have disposable income, spend it on things like cigarettes or other vices, and not have that same family-centric or community-centric aspect. And I can give a personal anecdote about this, which I think kind of ties into what Mariam was also talking about regarding this community and women's engagement. Last summer, for my master's project, I spent 3 months almost in a rural village in Madagascar, and everyone's a farmer, no running water, not connected to the grid. And the organization I was there with, we were conducting a more efficient version of rice farming. So we were conducting a workshop for everybody, and a male farmer volunteered his land for the workshop to be done on. And so it was very practical, hands-on, where sowing the seeds and then later transplanting them into the larger field. And so when it comes to actually going, the day that we go and we actually implement this, the person whose farm it was didn't show up, whose land it was. And so everyone else worked the land, and the male owner of the land didn't show up. And everyone, there were around 20 people who showed up, were women, right? And so that just shows, this was not a gender-specific workshop. There was no fee for this, but it shows that women, regardless of their benefit in that way, show up, and they show up for their community and their neighbors, and they're willing to engage and work on these innovative techniques and learn and see and try new things, right? So communication is definitely part of that. But I think with these larger grants, we still have to wait and see how that works out. But I definitely think that community level efforts and inclusion for women economically on the more basic levels, like access to banking, microfinance is great, but do women have access to the smartphones and all of those, Shinakhti card hai, all of these things, those are the levels I think we need to be working on. And when we get that grant money, we can see how to make sure that that gets into the right hands when we have that. Thank you.
Definitely. And I think how you're talking about different institutions and agencies that have to come into play to like look at the implementation of bigger issues. I would love to quote here an example of how Taiba was also working to pioneer blockchain-based digital wallets and power and financing and banking into the rural areas. And we did a pilot in 2022 when this was done in Ghotki rural Sindh. And as you just mentioned that we could have the pilot for the dashboard there, we could have blockchain based. And when we looked at the system of how it was operating, women there would not have access to mobile phones, so they would not get access to the OTPs. 100 million adults are unbanked currently in Pakistan, and 80% of them are women. They do not have access to traditional banking systems. So when it comes to providing aid or facilitation, there could be funds set up that we're going to disburse like 100 million, but how are you going to do that? We do not have channels set up. So that is when we had to resort to other sort of like QR codes, and that also then other sort of mechanisms, how you're going to bring alternatives, how you're going to bring adaptation to different sort of circumstances, and then make the system inclusive. So yes, I think in terms of pilots, in terms of technology, its perception and its effectiveness, it is there, but still in terms of the institutions that are connected to it, to bring it into expansion so that everyone could come into that ecosystem, that is still something that we need to work on and bring it into action. I think, thank you so much, Dania, wonderful insights. I think, Magra, if you could just build on it from the policy and negotiations point of view as well, because I think one pattern in all of our conversations was that we're lacking a focus on what's actually stemming a lot of these issues as well. So, for example, when it comes to, as Dania just mentioned, in terms of resource mobilization, we women do not have access to banking. When it comes to education, maybe the lack of primary schools. When it comes to health, the lack of very basic menstruation resources. Then issues of smog and all of this. So when we're looking at the policy level, what sort of proportion do you think in terms of importance would be given to these grassroots level issues, and then to the higher end that we're looking at, okay, maybe do X, Y, Z to combat smog, but it wouldn't be focused on the grassroots level, or maybe the what vulnerable communities at first hand are experiencing. So Mara, if you could just maybe build on a little about inclusive and grassroots level policy making.
Thank you, Zoha. And yeah, I think smog, of course, is such a big issue right now for not just Pakistan, but it's a transboundary issue. So, of course, India and even other South Asian countries are really facing this. So that's an interesting question about grassroots impact on policy making. I feel like, as I think Dania and a lot of other people are saying that, unfortunately, we suffer from a lot of top-down solutions, and not just in the government or development organizations. But, I think in many ways, it's this indigenous knowledge that and practices that we used to have, pre-colonial rule, which was actually quite bottom up, and of course, like women were very much included in that as well. So it's kind of like, I feel like I do look at this from a decolonial perspective as well, because, even if you look at Pakistani laws, all of that stuff, our policies are just, I think that we need to kind of re-identify how we want to co-create these kinds of policies with the people who are the backbone of this country, right? The farmers, the people who are, kind of working despite so many climate challenges, like so much precarity is happening because, a lot of the people who are the most vulnerable are not being represented, and even in places like Gilgit-Baltistan, for instance, where people are really suffering with, like, we've seen what the impact of droughts are having, and then there's this wave of tourism, and I feel like, for instance, if we, sorry, I'm moving away from the smog examples, but just this popped into my head. But like just things like ecotourism, right? In Gilgit-Baltistan, I keep hearing about it. I think a couple of years ago, with PTI's government, they were making some policy around ecotourism as well. But it wasn't really being made with like actors on ground, but more so thinking about the development that would come in from hotels and these kinds of things, right? So how can you make an tourism resort? That's actually really detrimental, right? We should think about how we can have tourism, but it's still safeguarding the well-being of the residents and the flora, the fauna, the ecosystem. It's so fragile. So these things, I feel like, unfortunately, we have really slipped into these cosmetic kind of policies. And if you pick up a lot of policies in Pakistan, they're really great, right? But the implementation also falls through. So I think more realistic policy making, and then more grassroots policy making. So you're, really taking in the nuances, the experience, the expertise of the people who are on ground, and I think that really can be done through having more empowerment on the smaller levels, right? Like the union council level, the district level, and then building upon those kinds of nuances and engaging with leaders. But I feel like oftentimes the people who are in leadership roles, especially in more indigenous communities, they're actually maligned by the government. They're not, they're disempowered. Like, I mean, look at Baba Jan, from Gilgit Baltistan, who was asking for reparations for Atabad Lake disaster, like things like that. Like, I mean, we've seen the backlash that people like that face. So I think we also, as civil society, I think have to rise up and hold people accountable. Um, I mean, I think the kind of atrocities that are happening, at the end of the day, everything is a question of justice and social justice. And the climate crisis is a part of that, of course, and everything is connected very much so. So I think in policies, we have to look at policies not as standalone documents, but living, breathing things that are interconnected and that need to be implemented, right? So I think that, I think we as citizens, if we come together a little bit and, start demanding more from our governments, the companies, the international community, I think we can really drive more change in that way. But I think empowering ourselves, I think uh, uh, s- uh, we were talking about Gen Z, I think they have so much more awareness than a lot of people did, because they're the ones who are going to suffer the most, and I think young people, like I was on a plane a few days ago, and I was going from the UK to Prague, and there was like these 10 young people on the plane, and I was working on this on this document, and then they asked me, "Oh, what are you working on?" And I told them, and they literally they had no idea about what the impact the current climate crisis is going to have on their lives. And literally, one of the guys was like, "Why is no one doing anything about this?" And that was so interesting to me, that like even people in these so-called developing countries, there's such little climate awareness. And yeah, why isn't it, like, there are people doing things, but it's so in silos. And I feel like, honestly, I've been so disenfranchised by COP, the last few COPs. It's just becoming such a, again, like a cosmetic thing. It's like a check mark for people working in this space. Not everyone, of course, but I just feel like when we talk about representation, having authentic representation, not having as many people represent, I think even these convening places where that impact policy have become so convoluted. Like, how can we drive any meaningful change when the things that are supposed to be driving these policy recommendations and change are not doing a good job? They're being hosted in petrostates the last 2 years. Like, what does that say? You're bringing so much money into these problematic petrostates, and you're talking about a just transition. Like, that makes no sense to me. So I think the UNFCCC also has to do better. I'm looking forward to next year in Brazil. I think that might be a bit of a turning point, because Brazilian leadership is not mincing any words. They're home to one of the most fragile ecosystems and pivotal ecosystems. So, but again, I hope it's not going to be this, like, people flying in their private jets to this country like that. So I think there needs to be stronger rules, even around policies and rules around even like things like like the cops, right? So yeah. So unfortunately, I feel like people are looking at the climate the climate crisis as a gold rush again. It's become the buzzword suddenly, climate finance, all these things, like, but without much understanding of the real life implications that we are all living through.
100%. And I think all of that boils down to how you talked about authentic representation and being true and having that coming actually with a lot of understanding and research. And I'd love to quote you about how you mentioned about the generational thing and how it's very much in the youth. And I like youth also very primarily is underrepresented when it comes to climate action, considering that the initiatives that they're taking at the local level. So even with the recent UNDP conference in Italy regarding the Youth for Climate, there were great initiatives towards innovation, towards awareness, and I think very heartwarmingly was mainly, I think 80% there were women representatives with their women, young girls. So I think, yes, these are a lot of communities being underrepresented when they're very much driven towards action, when they're very much driven towards voices, and also feeling that brand firsthand, and then B, how you could bring that bottom up to policy making. I think great insights. Thank you so much. I think we're towards the end of the session now. If anyone wants to drop in any ending notes, thoughts, and then we can wrap up. So feel free to unmute. You guys can take the floor. Okay, I think I have to jump in here. Dani, do you want to give an ending note? Because I feel like currently with the youth as well, when I particularly look at all of these narratives, I'm like, when is this going to translate into action? So maybe coming from a technical perspective, if you could give an ending note of probably if to stay driven and to stay and to believe that all of these technical aspects are as important as when we come to talks about action and how we could actually help to change the system altogether. Yes.
Thanks, Soha. So I kind of echo Mavra's point about I'm not sure how much these global climate negotiations, I don't have that much hope in them anymore. But what I do have hope in is I do believe in a lot of bilateral negotiations that are happening between countries. And I also think that, sorry, I just lost what I was going to say. I had it thought, but 1 second. But yeah, so I think there just needs, there needs to be a better understanding of incentives. And I think that's kind of the key of this, is I think that hearing what everyone says at COP, hearing what all these corporations are thinking is very important, because it helps you understand how and what incentives you're working with. And that can align how you do your advocacy, how you do your bottom-up work. And I think a good example of that is, we talked about the carbon markets a little bit earlier, but one of the easier, lower hanging fruits for that is people starting clean cook stove projects, right? And that's better for women's health because you don't want to be inhaling all of that, but then also better for the environment because you're releasing less of those greenhouse gas emissions. But the main problem with that is uptake. People don't always want to be using them, and the behavioral change element of that is really difficult. And so I think that these organizations and these governments need to understand women, who are the primary users of these clean cook stoves. And so I think that's kind of where I would come down to, is we need to be able to understand incentives and align how we move on and what sort of advocacy or what sort of policies we move towards based on those incentives, regardless of what exact action we believe is the best way to go forward. Thanks.
Definitely. And I think that incentive could very well also come in sort of creating those resources to take those action as well. Because I think in terms of setting goals, it feels all driven and motivated, but it probably can be a setback at times when you cannot get the resources together. So maybe just building incentives, not in terms of achieving the goal, but also helping throughout the process. So yes, definitely. Mava, I think you raised your hand. You want to pitch in any last thoughts?
Oh, sorry. No, I was trying to applaud what Dania was saying, but I raised my hand by accident. But thank you so much, Zoha, and everyone who's joined. I've learned so much from all of you. I'm so sorry about, a little bit of the noise and the transit issue. I'm literally on a bus right now. Yeah, no, it's just so lovely to hear that so many young women are working in these spaces and doing incredible work, and I look forward to staying connected with everyone. But yeah, I just do think that I think especially as I think we do have certain amount of privileges as well. I think not all women are part of the climate crisis, in the same way, of course. But I do think that, you know, we do need to raise awareness and empower voices, from the communities rather than being like a mouthpiece for them. I think, how, like, I think those are really important things of understanding, like, how can we, um, engage in a more authentic way? How can not just being like telling those stories, but giving them that platform, right? So, I mean, and it's really nice to hear that that work is also being done. And yeah, and I'd love to connect with all of you at some point. But just on a last note, I think the storytelling aspect we were discussing as well, which goes back to what I was saying, but like how the kind of post-growth kind of mentality I was saying, where we are talking about uh, changing an entire system of how we function on this planet, right? And thinking about uh, understanding that economic growth is actually very detrimental. And when is enough, right? What is enough? How much technology is actually going to help us? Like, for instance, I feel like we have things like AI now, and we know how much water and energy that takes, right? So, I mean, I feel like it's this we're living in this weird kind of dystopia right now, where the technology that we think is going to save us is actually doing so much worse. And I think we need a lot of voices to make the world understand this, right? Because I think the techno fix mentality that especially is being peddled to us by the overlords of capitalism is very, very detrimental. So how can we, as a developing nation, be part of that conversation? Because even I think, this year at COP, there's so much talk about carbon capture and geoengineering, which is so problematic, because where is this carbon going to be stored in developing countries like Pakistan and the global south? So these are things I think we need to have as young people have a future mindset on as well, because I think these are issues that are going to be really, really kind of mind-boggling to solve, and I think would really just enfranchise Pakistan even more. So yeah, so just like sorry, a bit of a scary ending thoughts, but I think as young people we should think about these things.
Yeah, and I think it hints upon the very important issue of transparency and accountability in terms of the policies that you're setting, in terms of the actions that you're taking. So I think, yes, whenever we're thinking about something, we need to keep in mind both the short and the long-term consequences of it in mind, because we can't just jump into something just like at the name of it being revolutionary or it being technologically cutting edge. So yeah, Hamna, yes, definitely. Feel free to pitch in.
Thanks, Soha. Just one final thought before we close down. I think the global stage it really, needs to come forward and state the climate crisis as the matter of urgency and put emergency measures in place, because with the current political landscape of the U.S. and within the Europe, also within the EU, the delay of the forestation bills, etc., it's not looking very great. So I think we really need to address this issue on an emergency basis and put emergency measures in force. So yeah, that was just a little bit of what, and I think Gen Z and the current generation is really, looking into it, and they're really making a noise. And all the oldies that are still a part of COP and such events worldwide, we saw COI 16 and in Colombia recently, and then the COP this year. To be very honest, I'm just losing hope, and I don't believe in these conferences anymore. Like, COP is just a conference, a yearly party, 2-week party for global leaders to fly in their private jets and reach to just network and party for 2 weeks. So yeah, there's a really important and essential need to put emergency measures in place for the crisis to address the issues, because other than that, I don't see the 1.5 degrees or even 2 degree that we need to, limit it to 2100, because we won't be there, but our children and our next generations would be there to face it. And according to the current reports, till 2100, the planet doesn't look very habitable. So yeah, that was just a final point. And yeah, it was an amazing, it was great to be a part of such an amazing panel today. And I would really love to stay in touch and maybe explore potential synergies, or at the very least, strengthen and support each other. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. And I think, yes, definitely of how the generation younger than us should also come up with, like, I think COI this year, Youngo being like a very huge youth-centric community currently, and then also other conferences that are happening at the local level, so that people who are going to be living few years down the line in this world could also get their voices heard. And I think a very fine example of that is how schools have started encouraging climate focused MUNs now. And when I would like attend them and hear they're passionate about, even if it's a country from the global south, that they're not living there, but their research would be like, we want this for this country. So I think that sort of energy, that sort of activism, that sort of advocacy, that is something that needs to be brought to light with younger generations. So I think great point. So that I think when it comes to like Gen Z, because I think Mayim, your channel has been directly in contact with them as well, getting reception to the sort of narratives that you're putting out. So any message to the younger generation that you would like to give towards engaging towards these narratives, or getting their voices heard? Because I think platforms and creating those resources, as we just mentioned about, it's also about helping the process. So if you could give any last thoughts towards how we could channelize our energies towards tapping or creating opportunities.
Absolutely. Firstly, I think I myself am a Gen Z, right? I'd put myself in that category. And I think the message would be, this is what I reiterate to myself, to everyone I know, my friends, family. A, practice what you preach. B, scalability and replicability. So as much as you can, like when I say scalability and replicability, what I really mean is that whether it's storytelling or whether it's financing, whether it's equity, you need to emphasize the scalability of grassroots solutions, what we've been doing in this entire conversation for over an hour. And with that, a broader adoption of more successful models across regions. So scalable and replicable. And the second thing I often say is strengthening accountability. At the end of the day, if I am saying something out there and I'm advocating for it very passionately, I need to hold myself accountable. I need to hold people that I care for accountable, because absolutely, as Greta says, every single time, she's younger than all of us right now in this room. There is no planet B, and we have to care about that. And it's not just simply about the generations that are yet to come, but it's about our present as well. So when we preach sustainability, when we talk about being sustainable, it begins at home, it begins within yourself. There's no way that you can do it without adhering to non-sustainable methods, or talking about policy, talking about finance, talking about equity without being climate conscious. So my message to people my age, people older than me, people younger than me would be that practice what you preach, and try to make sure that your advocacy is rooted in scalability, replicability, and accountability.
Great. I think particularly because I am also learning in this space, learning about climate and hearing all of this, of how we have this within us. We just need to recognize and bring it out and get our voices heard. These were all very motivational, very inspirational talks. Thank you, Mayam, Danya, Hamna, Mavra, for joining us. I would love to stay in touch and learn way more from you guys. Great work, and thank you so much for your time. Take care and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Soha.
everyone. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day,
Thank
everyone.
you. Okay, everyone, we're going to take a short break for 2 minutes, and after that, we'll be moving towards another short episode in collaboration with young women visionaries from Fark Parta Hai, who are working towards climate action in terms of its psychosocial impact and in terms of tackling stereotypes and taboos associated with it. So, very interesting conversation just starting in 2 minutes. So, stay tuned, and we'll just take a short break here. Hello, Momina. Thank you for joining. So we're currently going live on our YouTube channel. So we'd love if you could also share that with your network. I would encourage everyone who's looking at us to also share it around so we could have more engagement and keep sharing your thoughts as you were throughout the episode in the chat box. And we'll get those answered by the young visionaries from Fark Parta Hai joining us in just a bit. So, a little context and background to all of this is Fark Parta Hai is a youth-led, young women-led initiative. They're working towards climate action and women equity in building climate resilience and also simultaneously tackling taboos and stereotypes associated with it. With Taiba organization in the last month, Fark Parta Hai collaborated to get their word across, to get stories from the grassroots level across to different sort of media channels, media aspects and media avenues, and that was rolled out in terms of blogs, in terms of articles, in terms of carousel posts, research-based news. So in getting great reception. So this is here to hear from the young visionaries of how they came together for the cause and how they've been working together and how has actionists like Taiba supported and what sort of how helping the entire ecosystem, what sort of resources, what sort of energy do they want. So we have with us Momina Sahar, who is the executive director of Fark Parta Hai. Thank you, Momina, for joining us. We'd be having Sharmeen.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, so we'd also be having Sharmeen Zafar joining us, who is the executive director for marketing. So she'd be shedding light on how the storytelling has been happening through the two channels. And then we also have with us Fatma Hayat, who's the director outreach. She's been connecting with actionists, connecting with different organizations, institutions, and uh, different channels so that everyone could take collective action as our theme for H2O Climate Connect to catalyze climate action collectively together as one unit. So hello, Fatma. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me over. And wow, you made it sound so impressive, everything that I'm doing. But thank you.
I think that is great work when it comes to taking initiative. It has to start. It has to be that one drive and action. So I think, Momina, if we could start with you of how this vision was brought to light. What idea did you have? What goals did you guys set? How has things been working? What's the story behind Fark Parta Hai? And then we could start the conversation from there.
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. My name is Momina, and as our kind MOC has already introduced, I'm the executive director for Fark Padta Hai, and this is one of my favorite stories to tell. So I would love to take the opportunity to talk about Fark Padta a little bit. So we started off as a group of 5 girls who were passionate about causes like gender equality, climate change, and mental health. And we just knew from the get-go that we wanted to do something with the intersections of these three. But it was obviously being university students, you don't know where to start. So we started off basically by doing podcasts on things in Desi media that we thought were reinforcing gender stereotypes. So once we posted our podcast, they were only supposed to be a university limited thing where we were just trying to connect with our peers in our university. But those podcasts got a lot of attention, and we ended up getting reached out to by a lot of different organizations and the civil society, which encouraged us so much that we were like, whoa, even as students, even as youth, we can have a voice and we can have an impact. So that's where we decided to come together, and we decided that we want to work on everything that we're passionate about. And it was really encouraging that we can, because I feel like there are a lot of us, especially like youth people who want to work towards causes they're passionate, but they just don't know where to start, or how it all works basically. So there were a lot of industry experts like Taiba and other organizations that have helped us get a bit of our like work getting started, and they've shared their stories with us. They shared their experiences with us, which has helped us to get going. So basically, ever since then, we've been doing a lot of outreach. Fatma here has been excellent help in that. So we reached out to BetHug, and we have Dayaba, and I'll let Fatma talk about our other collaborations. But basically, all these organizations are the ones that were already in this sector doing all this amazing work, and they were like, oh, let us, support you wherever you need. And that is how basically we got to know how everything works. And now that we're here, we're actually trying to do impactful work, for which Tayaba has been very kind. So I'll let Fatma talk about a little about our projects and like how's it going now.
Yeah, I think that's a very wonderful story of how one just taking one initiative towards getting that awareness could actually build into an impactful movement now that's getting collective help and support from actionists that are working on ground. I think, Fatma, before you begin with the sort of projects that you guys are doing, I would love to hear your opinions as young studying students, and then looking at how you're going to be catalyzing different organizations at event itself. So when we started with that collaboration, how do you look at the notion of collective climate action or collective getting the resources together, getting the institutions and agency together? So if you could hint upon outreach from that perspective of how you're getting all of those on one plate towards that one cause, and what sort of reception have you got? Do you think currently the actionist approach, currently the agencies that are working towards it, do you think you're getting that acknowledgement towards the vision? Is everyone as excited? So what sort of energy are you guys channelizing towards getting everyone together for this?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to be real over here since we're just starting out, and there's been a lot of times in outreach when I have been, I will say it as it is, ghosted by organizations and initiatives. So basically, when we bring in our idea and we say we want to talk about gender and climate change, and then we also mention that we're students and we're just starting out, and this is something that we'd like to do, so would you like to come on board? So I feel like a lot of people just say that, yeah, the idea is great, we're so proud of you for doing this, and like we wish you the best. But then जहाँ तक काम करने की बात आती है, या oh let's actually strive to make take steps in the right direction, तो फिर I feel like overall, like in our community, it's like we're personally struggling with that. So Taiba has been kind enough to put some of your faith in us, and then we have been doing this amazing collaboration together, and I feel that that's great, and we need more of that. So definitely needs to be more trust into the youth-led initiatives that we're just starting out, and we know what we're doing, but we also need guidance, and we're trying to do the right thing over here. So the more well-established organization should maybe take a leap of faith, just like Taiba has done so for us, because we're obviously here for a reason, and we're all serious about what we're doing, especially when it's like comes to stuff like climate action and the gendered impacts that climate does have on our communities in Pakistan. So we should be able to sort of like bring together all the stakeholders who are working for that, because if we're really just trying to do things for like the greater good, so that should be our end goal, and we should be able to bring everyone on board, and just instead of just prioritizing organizations that are already doing super well and not sort of taking a risk on the ones that are youth-led or just starting out right now. But when it comes to oh yeah, Shameen, you want to add something?
Yeah, to that, I want to say that people have been super encouraging as they've been giving us a lot of appreciation for what we've been doing. But nobody was coming, like, nobody would, I wouldn't say nobody, but like a lot of people would just think of it as just something we're just doing as a hobby, or like we're not that serious about. So I don't think people were taking this seriously. And again, thank you to Taiba for collaborating with us, and yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Like Shameen, like I know how she's saying from also a social media point of view, all our reach and all the research articles that we're putting out, and like our community at like our university as well, and generally people are very supportive, and they're actually showing interest, and they're giving ideas and helping us improve and everything. So I'm really really happy about that, and like itna mindset hai ki people do care about these topics, and they need a platform, and that we can be a source of that platform for them to write and read and share their opinions. And like this discussion that we're having over here, I'm sure lots of people are also tuning in is pe bhi. So that does mean that people do care about this, and it is something that is important. So I just feel like if organizations ki side se, definitely they should give youth-led initiatives like us more of a chance to come forward and improve the work that we're doing.
Yeah, Momina, feel free to pitch in.
Okay, I just wanted to add that it might not seem like a really big deal to organizations that are already in the field, but since we started off in the first few months, so every time an organization would get back to us about anything at all, I remember me and Fatma being so excited, and we were like, "Oh, finally, this person replied." And it didn't even matter like what sort of collaboration it was or what level of support they were willing to provide. Most times, it wasn't even like a proper grant or anything, but it was just a bigger organization, someone that already has experience reaching out and saying, we'll hold your hand through this, we'll help you out, and that was enough. And that was enough to keep us going. And it means so much that it was one of the deciding factors that led to us deciding that we actually want to do this seriously. And coming from a privileged background, like all of us, like privileged is a subjective term, but we like to think that we have more resources than most in here. But even then, if we didn't have a positive response from a few of the organizations when we were starting off, like in our very early days, I don't think we would have gone through with this at all. And like the sort of encouragement that it provides is so serious, and it's so needed, and it might not be a big deal to everyone who's already experienced or working, but it basically means everything to like younger organizations. Yeah, Shameen, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to add to that, like even we have a team of 30 people right now, and we're not actually giving anything to them, but they just really want to contribute. And that just shows that people really need outlets for that. And they want to contribute, but they just don't have outlets. So through these collaborations and like through these initiatives, we can help do that at least, right?
Definitely. And I think this very well echoes it for our audience that has joined us for the past hour. So we were having our Her Impact episode before this, and that we had speakers join us. And that is where our speakers very well hinted on how the younger generation is very driven, they're very motivated, but what we're lacking here is incentive. What we're lacking here is good channelization of resources. So it's not just about the aim that they've set, the goal that they've set. You need to help them and support throughout the process. And be it a very small step, you are going to see the impact later. And I think your story very well translates into that. So I think just building upon collaboration, I think the value of collaboration at this point. So Taiba in itself is driven by storytelling that is very authentic, that is very transparent, that comes from the stories of on ground, the people who are feeling the impact, who have been displaced, who were forced to migrate, who do not have access to water or would travel miles. So I think when I had like the initial meeting with Fatma as well, and I would like very briefly narrate to her the stories that did move me with regards to how you had to, how rural women in Pakistan, 80% would have to head load and travel miles just to get the basic human resource, water, and how there are women who have been left bent throughout their lives. I think that's also the story we had a very value-adding discussion on. So when it comes to organizations providing that authentic data and sources and authentic information and raw and organic stories, how important do you think, how pivotal has been the role of storytelling? I think, Sharmeen, you would very well put into it, because accessing data, if there has been like a gap in terms of getting that raw authentic story, or maybe being an overlap of stories, so how has the process around narratives and storytelling helped, and then how have grassroots organizations like Taiba and many of your partners supported you or helped you, and what could be done better in terms of narratives, in terms of the multi-lens approach that we could take towards looking at these stories?
I think it has been really helpful in the way, as like before Taiba, when I was looking for generally just statistics and stuff, it was really hard to find Pakistani statistics or like even South Asian statistics, because that are just so rare. Like people don't want to invest in researchers, right? So to have those statistics and those two based in Pakistan, and again, people people just really easily rely on information they're getting. They don't want to check it, that what is the source of that information coming from. So like Taiba so when I visited your website for the first time, I was like pleasantly surprised, because it was really inspiring to see that there is a huge audience that we're not like through. Obviously, um, we do try to aim to reach a larger audience, right? But like we can't reach those demographics as जहाँ पे पानी available नहीं है वहाँ पे internet क्या available होगा, right? So through that, through like reading those stories and reading those statistics has been really amazing, and that has helped us a lot. And in the sense that like we're not only raising awareness through that, we're actually inspiring action, that if you can do it, or if we can do it, anyone can do it, right? So, and yeah, and any one of you who'd like to say something?
Yeah, I think Fatma, Humna, if you guys have any thoughts to share on this, on sort of narratives and storytelling that has to come, because even in our episode, it was very well put of how younger generation, because we're looking at a future for us to live in, we're looking at a planet for us to live in. So how youth voices in terms of understanding climate or understanding the sort of narratives with the sort of lens that you can take to look at it. So if you guys have any opinions in terms of like how storytelling has impacted your mission in terms of getting your word across as well.
Actually, it all started from storytelling. So we were discussing, like Momna said, we started from podcast, right? And we were just discussing how, like, through movies and like through how impactful media can be, and like learning those stories and learning, it is really important to understand कि grassroots level पे क्या हो रहा है. I can sit here and say that, we need to change this and we need to change that, but do I know what actually is happening? I don't think so. And that's where the part where to have an authentic information of what's going on is really necessary. And to look at it from a lens of our own, like from our people, it's more beneficial. And even when I was looking at statistics and I was looking for content, it was mostly about India. And like even if they don't have access to resources, they're well researched compared to what we're doing here right now. So thank you to Taiba for like having those and like sharing those with everyone through their website and blogs has been really beneficial.
Yeah, I think we're also in the phase of getting as much word as we can, because I think these stories and these stats are something that go unnoticed. Because even when you look at bigger conferences happening right now, when you look at COP, would you ever look at a raw story as women being labeled as or being reduced to as water laborers being discussed at COP? But we made it happen this year. We had a documentary launch there so that we could somehow get the raw story, get those narratives which go unnoticed at the global platform, so that there's equitable importance given to the matter of life, to the matter of foundations, and also to the matter of technical aspects of setting grants, setting funds, setting, as there's a buzz thing going around like the copper finance of the carbon markets and all of that. So I think it's about bridging that gap so that everything would come into equity, and we could get the word across. And I think great kudos to the organizations that are working on ground to get these information and data for us as well from grassroots. So I think Taiba now operates within a vast network of 50 plus on ground partners. So that is where when we see actionists and motivations like your organization coming up, that they need access to this information and data, that is where we then harness our channels to get that data for us, for the community, for everyone to view and get inspiration, motivation, and that little edge to, act, to create a change in them as well. Great. I think just building around the narrative of, have you guys been keeping up with COP29? What's happening there? Any conferences when it comes to like global narratives? So we're trying here to address the gap that these global conferences do stem when it comes to a representation of women. So if you've had the chance to look at the opening picture that was showcased at COP from the state level climate change representation, less than 3% women there. And then when it comes to youth, so youth representation has now been recognized. So COI, that is the Conference of Youth, was started, or pre-COP youth events were started just a few years back, say 3 or 2. So what sort of message or what sort of feelings do you guys as young visionaries towards climate change feel when it comes to seeing global conferences yet very underrepresented youth or very underrepresented women? And then also global south particularly, so vulnerable countries who are facing the brunt of climate crisis like Pakistan. So any thoughts on that? How have feelings around COP been for you guys?
I'll just answer that quickly. I remember Fatma shared that like the women representation this year was really less, and I just remember that I just got really sad that we're 51% of the population, and that's the kind of representation we're getting, as if those voices don't matter, and just really genuinely made me super sad. So yeah.
I just wanted to add to the last topic that we were discussing too really quickly. And I want to say that there is a sort of, it's very unfortunate, but I don't know why, but there is a sort of gatekeeping of information and resources, even at the government level, which is very, very unfortunate. So we are relying on organizations like Dayaba to get us like connected with grassroots organizations, especially as youth and women. It's very hard to access those communities. And like, you really have to not just like look at it from like an outsider lens, but really integrate your entire research in a way that you're really understanding what their challenges are instead of just like looking at it and reporting it. Other than that, about the COP thing, it is really unfortunate that the women representation was very less. And the fact is that you cannot be doing any policy making or coming up with any ideas with like not having half the population there. So like representation matters, and we do believe that any solutions that you can come up with cannot be inclusive and cannot be you can never integrate a complete perspective without having those people on board. And so, just like we were just saying that we can't understand the challenges of the communities without ever being in direct interaction with them, we cannot understand the challenges of another gender or maybe another age group without integrating them into our frameworks and into the kind of the work that we're doing. So yeah, like I don't think that anything could ever be 100% fruitful without like representation from not just all genders but all like sectors, especially.
And we also need to understand that climate affects different genders differently. It affects women really differently from than it does to men, right? So if we're not representing that, how are we going to get something done, right? So that's like something we should keep in mind.
Definitely. I think there's this never ending debate of how we're setting gender sensitive policies when the people setting it are not gender inclusive. So how are the outcomes coming out? And maybe that is one of the reasons of why those outcomes are not translating into tangible action or maybe into results. So yes, and I think with COP also comes the element of youth representation, youth being underrepresented as well. Um, and and I think the lack of affirmativeness to ask for what's needed, that these are the resources and this is our right to access these resources. If we are to save the planet, if we are to work towards a greener future, this is what we demand. So I think that is also what is lacking there as well. Now, when it comes to like community mobilizations or gathering resources, so Yango, as well as you would be aware, is one of the biggest young community that's also led on voluntary basis. And as you mentioned, you have a team of 30 who are driven by their inner, who are driven by their action and drive to maybe contribute, if little as well. How has the journey been to like start with a very small action, and now that you guys are also in the growing phase, you're seeing impact, you're seeing your work getting recognized? What sort of motivation or inspiration does that bring to you guys, so that we could also understand the importance of creating incentives or creating resources? That if now with this chunk of resources we've developed this impact, with maybe an expanded version we could scale it up, we could get a bigger impact, and that is how we're going to channelize all the resources. So in terms of the sort of impact and response that you guys are getting, how does that feel? How does that it does it feel motivated, or at point is it just like it's very temporary, probably this is going to go down and then we'd have to? So how do you keep up with that youthful energy to run a youth-led, a women-led, a very young and small organization in terms of its initiatives that are being taken?
Okay,
Anyone should be
can I answer that?
yeah,
So basically, when we started off, when we were, it was just the five of us, and we were discussing how we're gonna get things done, and we were reaching out to everyone. And we thought one of our biggest challenges would be getting volunteers. But as we started, even in our initial months, the thing that we realized was that was the easiest job. And so getting those campus ambassadors on board and getting those volunteers on board was, we basically had so many people coming in and telling us that they want to be involved in the kind of work that we're doing. So that was the part that was the most motivating thing in this entire journey, I believe, because it was so refreshing to see that we're not alone in any of this, and everyone is feeling the same things that we're feeling, and they aren't just feeling it, they're driven, they want to do something about it. And it was the most refreshing thing ever to know that we are able to provide a mini platform, just a little tiny voice that can help them convey their concerns as well. So now our entire team is completely driven by their entire, like you said, it's just their motivation comes from within. So I think that is the single most encouraging thing in this entire initiative, that all of these youth leaders are completely self-motivated. They want to make a change. And I think that was the easiest part of getting all of this started.
Adding to that, we aren't offering them any incentive yet, right? So they're doing it genuinely out of their own motivation. So, and I feel like a community mobilization can be a very essential tool, especially if you're aiming towards like small but meaningful actions. And I think that's what we're trying to do here at Fark Padta Hai, that we don't want to we don't want to wake up one day and say we will change the day, we'll change the world. We're not doing that. we just want to bring meaningful actions within our localities, right? Within our own community. And I feel like having youth supporters do that. I'm sorry, having youth on board has been really helpful. Like they genuinely want to help, and like people driven with passion uh really like they genuinely want to do something for the community just like us. So having like-minded people has been really beneficial.
And
And
I
one
feel like,
Yeah.
sorry, and I feel like adding to what Shameen said, that often we see in like in our surroundings and like our community and like the online community that we've garnered over the last few months and in our university and our social circles, people share our mindset. They want to do good work, they care about these things, they know about these things, it's affecting them as well. Climate, gender inequality, women empowerment, they want to do something, they don't know how to start and they don't know where to put their efforts in, right? So it's been very helpful in our volunteers also. That's why they came on board and they joined us, because they also knew that they wanted to contribute in some way, they just didn't know where to contribute. So then I'm happy that Fark Parta has been able to give other people with sharing, like who are sharing our mindset, they also have like a mini platform to like, you know, contribute in small but meaningful way. And that in itself should be like a huge encourager for other institutions and organizations to invest more resources in youth-led initiatives like us, because as Momna said, we're mostly driven on intrinsic motivation. So there is no other hidden agenda for now. We're doing it solely because we want to do it. And you know, and think of how far we'll go if we actually have more resources than, you know, what we're going on by right now. And right now it's just sheer dedication and commitment to a shared cause. So it's only forward from here. Definitely. And I think that is one thing that has been emphasized, that what the youth is looking at resources to support, rather than resources that would anyhow like be beneficial for themselves as an individual. They're looking for an entity, they're looking to change the planet by small initiatives and by support. So what we're asking for in terms of incentives is resources, is education, is access to platforms, and as Sharmeen said, access to data so that we can look at what's happening on ground. So maybe demanding for accountability, demanding for transparency. And I think that those are very important notions and those are very important discussions, and also where we as individuals who are said to be the inhabitants of the coming future would demand as our right. I think definitely great points on that. And we are now moving towards the end of the session. I think what Fark Parta has been doing is great. And also, we as Taiba, as an organization, as an actionist, bringing the words of grassroots organization, climate vulnerable organizations to ground could support the volunteers, could support youth, could support young women, and everyone, as we say, H2O for all, help to others for all. So everyone in any way possible could be is our bigger initiative, so that the small steps that we're taking could get into a ripple and big impact. So on that note, girls, if you guys have any ending notes, feel free to share, and then we'll be tuning off. We're getting great response at the chat where people are saying how all of those struggles that were initially are now translating into success. So they're saying that's great. And there are a few people who would want to know how you think youth voices could be amplified at COP. So if anyone wants to give like any last thoughts, with also something that you look at could help you amplify your voices.
I would just say one thing, that what we actually believe at Falparta is that every action matters, no matter how big, no matter how small. So like whatever one can do in their own capacity, they must do that. So Momin and Fatma, would you want to say something?
I just want to say that in terms of youth representation at COP, I want to take this moment to really appreciate the efforts that Taiba is doing with these online webinars as well. So it's lovely to see that despite some of the criticisms that I have, COP has become this little event where we can all come together, and even if we're not present there, we can have these discussions online. And, you know, it's sort of like a moment where we just put everything aside and we're like, you know, climate change is the thing, we need to do something about it. So it's great that we're doing all of this and having these conversations, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity.
Yeah, we're really thankful to Taiba for trusting us as a partner and like having this impactful and innovative collaboration with us. So really,
Thank you so
Grateful
much
to you
for
all.
kind words. I think it's all about, as you guys say, it's intrinsic. It's to make every action count. It's to actually come together, and as the tagline of our H2O Climate Connect is to catalyze collective climate action. We do it together. We do it as one entity. So I think that is one mission and vision that we're also driven with. Thank you so much for joining in. We look forward to stay connected to everyone, and also to everyone who tuned in, showed interest, and interacted with us. Don't forget to follow Taiba and Farkwarta and all our speakers that you had an opportunity to listen to earlier in this episode. And with that, we'll be tuning out. So take care, guys. Have a great
Thank
day.
you. Bye.
Great
Thank
having you
you.
all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.